Everyone, and thank you for being here and joining us for the session, Journalism Shaping a World at Peace. I hope you're enjoying the GMF so far. Today, we want to discuss a question which seems more urgent than ever. What kind of journalism do we need, and how can we support journalists in their vital role of helping build more informed, democratic, and peaceful societies? Around the world, journalists are working under growing pressure. They face legal intimidation, violence, online attacks, shrinking revenues, and are confronted to a more and more complex digital world. Yet, at the same time, journalism remains one of the most important public goods we have. Today's discussion is based on the World Trends Report on Freedom of Expression and Media Development from 2025. It provides a global picture of the challenges, but also of the opportunities journalism is facing right now. This session is jointly organized by UNESCO, the German Commission for UNESCO, and DW. Thank you all partners for making this conversation possible. And before we begin the panel discussion, I want to welcome somebody who has been working for UNESCO for many, many years, Ms. Sylvie Coudray, who is the director of UNESCO's Division for Freedom of Expression, Media Development and Media Information Literacy. Sylvie, please join me.
Merci. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. So I'm going to make a presentation of the main trends that were identified in this World Trend Report. But before beginning, I would like to thank the German National Commission and DW for co-organizing this event. The World Trend Report has been produced since 2014, and it's published every 4 years. And it's a flagship report from UNESCO, since it's giving main trends for the last 4 years. The thematic, as you said, of this report this year or last year, it was published in December 25. The title is Journalism Shaping a World at Peace. And it reaffirms a fundamental truth, which is freedom of expression and access to information are indispensable foundations for peaceful societies. So what does this published report tell us? And I'm going to give a lot of figures. This is why I'm reading. So since 2012, the Global Freedom of Expression Index has declined by 10%, a regression previously seen only in periods of major global conflict, and I'm thinking of the 2 world wars. So this is a trend that should alarm us. And of course, we all want to understand why. And here the report identifies several interconnected drivers behind this decline. First of all, media self-censorship has risen sharply by 5% annually and 63% overall since 2012. Secondly, the control over the media by governments and powerful actors has grown by almost 4% per year, resulting in a 48% increase in restrictions over the past 12 years, often through restrictive laws and smear campaigns that undermine trust in journalism. This contraction extends beyond the media sector. Academic freedom and artistic freedom have also declined nearly 3% annually, signaling a broader narrowing of civic space. And these trends unfold in a global context where authoritarian regimes now outnumber democracies. Today, 72% of the world's population lives under some form of authoritarian rule, the highest level in decades. And these developments don't happen in a vacuum, but within a broader set of trends. First of all, this includes the growing weaponization of legal system, or slap cases and rising violence against journalists. Additionally, women and gender non-conforming journalists are disproportionately targeted, particularly online. A global survey by UNESCO and by UN Women found that 73% of women journalists have experienced digital attacks, which often led to offline violence. The number of offline attacks followed by the number of online attacks followed by offline attacks rose from 20% in 2022 to 42% in 2025. Meanwhile, the rise of generative AI presents further risk against these women journalists by fueling technology-facilitated gender-biased violence. According to the report, 98% of deepfake videos online are non-consensual pornographic content, with women featured in 99% of cases. The pressure of these trends is felt across all the board, but it is also particularly acute for journalists covering climate and environmental issues. Beyond physical and legal threats, journalism is confronting a profound economic crisis. Traditional business models are eroding as advertising revenues migrate to digital platforms. A small number of dominant tech companies now capture more than half of global advertising revenue, undermining media viability, reshaping information ecosystem, and concentrating power in ways that often weaken pluralism. At the same time, this economic decline coincides with the rapid adoption of new digital technologies, which has transformed public communication in ways that increasingly undermine trust. Despite these negative or troubling trends, the report also highlights some reasons for hope. First, between 2020 and 2025, 1.5 billion people gain access to social media and messaging platforms, expanding public participation, dialogue, and exchange of ideas on an unprecedented scale. Second, nearly half of countries worldwide now legally recognize community media. Third, more countries have been adopted supportive legal frameworks for access to information laws. As UNESCO latest global mapping reveals that there has been encouraging progress over the past two decades. Notably, 139 UN member states have adopted constitutional, statutory, and/or policy guarantees of public access to information. Additionally, advances in digital tools have also enabled a significant increase in cross-border investigative journalism, facilitating collaboration between journalists from different countries and newsrooms to expose corruption, organized crimes, and abuses of power that no single outlet could address alone. So these are the major trends, and again, the main message of this report is that journalism is not peripheral, it is really foundational. It lies at the heart of democracy, peace, and sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvie, for setting up the stage for our discussion. One number that particularly stood with me after reading the report, it says that more than 300 journalists got killed since 2022. I mean, we're talking about people, we're talking about families, we're talking about stories that may never be told. Thank you for your remarks, because they remind us that the figures in the reports are not only statistics, and that journalism remains a very, very dangerous profession in many regions of this world. So thank you again, Sylvie. I now want to welcome my panel. Please join me in welcoming Christian Mier, who is the Managing Director of Reporters Without Borders in Germany. Christian, please come. We have Jessica White, who was researcher on AI Media Development and Regulation at the International Fund for Media Interest, Public Media Interest.
International Fund for Public Interest Media. It's a long name.
Such a long name, right? Thank you so much. And we have Laura Moore, who is Head of Research and Evaluation at our own DW Academy. Thank you for joining me. Let's dive straight in our first topic, journalism under pressure. Christian, Reporters Without Borders examines and tracks press freedom around the world every year. Sylvie just mentioned that the Freedom of Expression Index has dropped by 10% since 2012. What does this decline actually mean for the journalists on the ground? How are they affected in their daily work?
I mean, your question addresses structural issues, and of course, behind every journalistic case, there is a human being. But I would say from Reporters Without Borders perspective, one could say that we see three concrete shifts in press freedom. First of all, I would say it's the issue of safety and self-censorship. And one very alarming figure from the UNESCO report was that in the time of the report, actually, we had a number of 66% of journalists saying that actually the level of self-censorship increases, so that 66% of journalists think twice, or not only twice, maybe 3-4 times, whether it's worth publishing a story, whether it's worth risking actually the legal threat, whether it's you're risking being killed for a story. And I think this is one of the most alarming figures from the report, actually, that actually the question of safety, which is very often visible when we talk about killing journalists, and self-censorship, very often it's not a visible thing. And the second shift, I would say, is the economic precarity. We have actually, globally, we see that actually we have less and less resources for the daily work doing journalists, for the slow work doing journalists. You mentioned, Sylvie, the importance of transnational collaboration. This very often is slow journalism, where you need time to identify resources, to understand data, and we see actually that the journalistic work is getting more and more precarious. And the third structural shift is something which I would label as the fight to be found. This somehow sounds rather abstract, but I think I would say it's maybe one of the most fundamental shifts we currently observe in journalism, since Google introduced the AI overview, since we have all the ChatGPT and chatbots all around. Actually, we always had, journalism has been fighting for attention in something which we call public sphere. And actually, this public sphere has been always under threat. But since the introduction of AI overview, since the introduction of chatbot and everything, actually, not the public sphere anymore decides actually whether journalism reaches its audience or not. So journalism is really, I would say, active in a hostile environment, in a hostile digital environment, and it's not anymore the question, very often the question whether a story is to be published. You can publish a story, but if the story does not reach any audience, this is actually a problem which I would say as a third shift, which I would label as a fight to be found.
And you have a recent example. Did you work with a journalist who experienced that and whose story wasn't found on the internet due to algorithm and platform power?
Well, we do have this globally. Every day we experience this. We currently do a survey at Reporters Without Borders, where we really try to look on the impact of AI overview on visibility, and so there are many stories which really, where's the risk of not being found. And I think it's not, you cannot say that's for the time being, because it's really, I would say, a very recent trend, but a recent trend which in such an enormous speed is impacting journalism. And I normally don't tend to be dramatic, but I think that it is dramatic.
Let me come to you, Jessica, when we talk about technologies. What is changing at the moment? I mean, for quite a while, technology and especially AI were considered as a great opportunity for journalism. Where do you see the highest risks at the moment?
Yes, I think I just wanted to reflect on what Christian just said on the pace of change recently, just to think that the last World Trends report in 2022 came out early that year. ChatGPT hadn't even launched then, it launched later that year. It now has about 1 billion active monthly users, and of course there are other platforms vying for people's attention now. So the pace of change over the last couple of years has been truly phenomenal. Of course, digital outlets were already feeling the pressures of readers or users turning to social media platforms and shrinking revenue. So that was already reality. But what has been happening with the rise of AI has been truly a sort of a rewiring of how content gets produced, how it gets distributed, and also monetized. And what concerns us most at the International Fund for Public Interest Media is a fundamental risk, and that is that public interest journalism will no longer be able to sustain itself financially and reach people with quality information. And I think the conditions for that are already in motion. We are seeing how AI is accelerating this market failure for reliable information. So how is this playing out exactly? Well, we're seeing that AI systems are extracting, they're summarizing, they're also repackaging content, including journalistic content, on their platforms without necessarily compensating the original producers of that information. There are very little returns on investment for journalism, which is costly to produce, it's time-consuming, and as we've seen, it's dangerous in many parts of the world. And what we also see, which Christian pointed to, is a question of visibility. Newsrooms are less visible on these platforms, and users are less likely to click through to the news sites. So we've seen a reduction in traffic, and therefore that impacts also revenues. But the key point I also wanted to raise here, and the threat, is that this isn't necessarily impacting everyone equally. And we see this with big licensing deals with AI companies and publishers. Most of them have been with big publishers in the global north, with predominantly English language publishers, and those in other markets that are not necessarily a priority for the dominant AI companies have been largely left out, and they have less leverage and less bargaining power. And this is not just a question about money, it is also about who is visible, who is not on these platforms. And we see how dominant AI systems are less accurate often in these countries, and often less surface, less local authoritative information. So this is a real problem, and I just wanted to end with one stat that sort of exemplifies this. So NewsGuard does these regular audits of leading AI models, and they found in the most recent one, they prompted them about the war in Iran, and they found that these models returned false claims about 25% of times on these models, which is, I think, a pretty high statistic. And it just shows when reporting is under-resourced, when it's in short supply, how AI models and systems just risk filling the gap with state propaganda, with other low-quality content. So this really has broader consequences on information integrity, and the fact that AI systems cannot produce the original reporting. I mean, we really rely on that original reporting to be there, especially in times of conflict and polarization.
Thank you for pointing out the risks. Let me come to you, Laura. When we talk about the risk and the political pressure journalists are facing, we also have the problem of an economic crisis. You work on media viability with an angle on media development. What worries you most at the moment about the future for sustainability when it comes to journalism?
Yeah, thank you. So I can speak, as you say, from the media development perspective, which is basically international cooperation in the field of journalism and media. And here I think we need to be quite self-critical when we look at the last maybe around decade and the work that we've been doing. We thought for a long time that we can solve this crisis, this economic crisis of journalism, by looking at individual media outlets. So we thought that if we helped partner media in different countries to be more innovative, to be experimental with business models, then potentially it would be easier for them to survive. Let's say it like this. So there are these examples, and I've mentioned them before. I've seen them in different countries where, you visit a radio station, and this radio station has like chicken in the backyard because they're selling eggs to make money for the radio, or they offer services for online cafes or whatever, or other kind of services, or they sell wine or things like this, things that distract from the core business of journalism. And I do say we have to be self-critical because we thought, if you try out different things and if you try out new things, then you will succeed. And I think we very well now know that this is not the case. We have to look at the systemic level. You have mentioned that, Christian is mentioning it. We really need to make sure that journalism operates in an environment that allows it to survive, right? So we need to have a much more systemic approach, and I can talk maybe a bit later about what can be done. The second thing that worries me, and this is also regarding our work in media development, is that we really need to set priorities together with the partners and the media houses and civil society organizations that we work with. We published something as Deutsche Welle Academy, which is called the State of Media Development Report. It was just published a few weeks ago. And there's one figure that I can't stop to mention, which is only 37% of organizations working in partner countries, mostly in the so-called global majority countries, only 37% of partners think that they are involved enough in priority setting when it comes to projects in media development. So we need to get much better at really involving partners from the beginning in setting the strategies and solving these problems, because only if we know what they think can solve the problem, we can support the cause.
And when we step back from the problem side, do you see reasons for optimism still?
I absolutely do. I mean, there's this, thing saying there's always an opportunity in crisis, and I think that in media development we're actually really seeing this. Why? Because we learned to coordinate and collaborate in a way that I did not think that was possible some years ago. We have something that's called Media Viability Manifesto Group, which is something where 23 media development organizations are coming together because we realized that we are all in this together, that we face the same problems, that we also realized that it's not a thing that we can, with our individual partners, maybe tackle, but we really need a systemic approach and answer to that. So we came together, developed something called the Media Viability Manifesto, which has 4 very concrete areas of work where we think we need to focus on. It's online, everyone can Google it, where you can see, I'm not going to go too deeply into the details, but it's not only about business and technical support, but it's also about advocacy, it is about coalitions and partnerships, it is about research. So it is, there we have an agreement, a coordinated, more systematic approach to trying to solve these problems. This is one thing. And the other thing is, I just mentioned advocacy. We can see that more and more people are realizing that we have this systemic crisis. And that we need more policy and advocacy work also in the field of media development. And this is happening more and more. I mean, organizations like Christian's have been doing a lot. They have been very loud also towards, you know, trying to change the overall environment, being heard by political actors. And I think we have always been quite shy, and this is slowly changing, I feel. So that gives me some hope.
Quite shy. Okay. Does that resonate with you? Christian, she mentioned your name and the work Reporters Without Borders is doing. Does that resonate with what you're seeing?
I would say yes. We do have to speak out loud, and I mean that's why I really like the claim of the Global Media Forum, and we have to advocate it for it. But what does it mean? I mean, it means that we really have to change, I would say, understanding of press freedom. I would say so. Historically, we defended the right to publish. We really defended the right to publish. But the right to publish, that's not anymore enough. We really have to defend the right to be found. And this is really a way of rethinking press freedom, and maybe not that much, because if we look into Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there's a second part, which sometimes is forgotten, which talks about the right to receive information, but very often I would say press freedom community and the press freedom, even the regulators, we very often only talk about norms for defending the practice of journalism, publishing information, and this is actually where we really have to rethink. And I would say, who governs visibility? I would say it's the most decisive questions in the next 5 years. Do we have people, AI platforms, tech companies who decide only out of their own business interest which information is visible, which kind of journalism is visible or not? Or do we really have norms, democratic norms behind it, like we have norms for the safety of journalists, like we have norms for ethics, and we are really at the starting point. I think 4 or 5 years ago there have been discussions on the potential of AI, but I think currently that is such a dramatic shift, and I think we have some tools on the set. I think this is important to not sound so frustrating. I really want to say that we have initiatives globally on the field, even in the policy fields. We have the European Media Freedom, which has a Media Freedom Act, an Article 3 in European Media Freedom Act, which is really innovative in that sense, which has been implemented which has been launched by the European Union in 2024, which talks about the right to receive reliable information and plural information. And I think this is not something which right-wing populists very often label as someone wants to dictate actually the content and the editorial lines. No, it's about which kind of information you find digitally. And this regulation of the European Media Freedom Act has to implement it in the European countries in order to really strengthen this right to be found. And currently there's another discussion on the European level, and this regulatory discussion on the Audiovisual Media Service Directive, a regulatory framework which I would say 5-6 years ago nobody was interested in, but currently this is, I would say, really one of the key policies on the European level, which decides about actually which information is to be found. And this is why actually right-wing populists all over Europe are currently advocating about this, and the US government advocates about the reform of these initiatives, because they are actually defending the right of the tech oligarchs. And I think this is what I would say, what is the resonance to this? Actually, we have to advocate for it, but we don't have to invent everything. We have some tools on the table, but we really have to rethink from the right to publish to defending the right to publish, but to defend as well the right to be found.
Thank you. Laura, you wanted to add something.
Just a number. It feels like we're very much like percentages today and reports and numbers. But I recently read that 1% of people click on links in these AI overviews. And this is, I think we also have to ask ourselves, right? I mean, when I want to know something, I search Google, I get an overview, and I don't click on the link. I need to be very honest. You need, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I would like to know who actually does. And this, in the end, translates into visibility, what you say, the fight to be found, translates into advertising and into money. And it's a bit like, you know, I sometimes feel we discuss this, we work for this every single day, and then we also don't do it really ourselves.
And what could be a more responsible way of using AI? Jessica?
I mean, I think that, you know, as we said, these are systemic issues, and it can't be solved outlet by outlet. I think that's clear. And I think we also can't just wait on one silver bullet solution, licensing deal that will solve things forever for media, because things will eventually change. As we've seen, there is rapid change happening, and they will evolve. So I think one thing that media leaders need to do is actively engage with this change over time and really start asking themselves, am I protecting the status quo and trying to save myself in the short term, or am I building towards something, towards the future? Because we have to invest in those types of solutions. And I think more broadly beyond the media sector, that's something that we have to ask ourselves, you know, what does our future ecosystem look like? What do we want it to look like? And for that, I think collaboration and coalitions are key, both within, between media organizations, thinking about what they can build together, shared infrastructure, services, things like that, but also with technologists, with academia, with policymakers, with, you know, us and media development organizations, because we have to invest in those solutions. And that's one thing that we've been trying to do within our organization, is to serve as this platform to facilitate collective action, working with partners in the Global South, from Brazil, from South Africa, from Indonesia. And last year we organized a series of conferences that brought together journalists, you know, media experts, academics, LLM builders, you know, people who don't usually get into the room together to talk about these issues. And, you know, they shared insights. They start building kind of a shared understanding of what responses are emerging, so that they can develop shared agendas for the future. Because I think it is really something that we have to engage, you know, AI not just within the newsroom, but also AI, how is it affecting our business and our future, so that we can continue to produce quality information.
So cross-border collaborations could be part of the solutions. Thank you for those insights. We've talked a lot about the threats which are mentioned in the report. I mean, from safety concerns to technology to economic sustainability. But the report in itself is not only about threats, it's also about something bigger, about the role journalism can play in helping societies stay informed, stay resilient, and be peaceful. So I would like to step back and take a look at the bigger picture and ask you three, if we want journalism to continue serving the public and contributing to peace, what is the single most important thing which would need to change in the next years? Let's say in the next 5 years. Who wants to start? Rapid fire questions.
Should I start? Mel Bunce is here, and she today launched another report on the value of journalism, and that says, and I know that Mel doesn't really like the number, but I think it's very strong. Experts estimate that 0.1% of global GDP would be enough to fund healthy ecosystems for citizens around the world. 0.1% of global GDP, which is 15 days of global military spending. The one single thing that we could be doing is try and get 0.1%, which doesn't seem to be a lot if you look at the number, to get invested in journalism. And make the point that this investment is worth the money, and that for a comparatively low amount or a small amount of money, you get a big return on investment. So if we can make sure that with all the money that's out there in the world, and you mentioned how much money goes into other people using the money, maybe not in the way that that we would hope, 0.1% of global GDP would be good.
Wow. Can you top that?
Well, if it's in one single sentence, I would say stop treating press freedom just as a right to publish, but and start defending press freedom as a right to be found.
Agreed. What about you, Jessica? What would you do?
I mean, I think ensuring the supply side is one of the basic things that we need to do, and finding durable mechanisms to support journalism. But I think, we also have to really, to my point before, really start investing in the solutions together. And I think some of the biggest opportunities will be coming from the Global South, and perhaps, they have less to lose because tech companies are not prioritizing them as much, and maybe there are more opportunities to build these collective efforts, and using open source, using shared infrastructure, and trying to build systems from the ground up that are optimized for public interest information. But for that to happen, we need investments, we need people to come together and actually solve for those problems.
Talking about bringing people together, I would like now to bring our audience into the conversation. So if you have questions, please come forward. There's a microphone. Introduce yourself quickly and ask questions. Anybody? Please.
Hi, my name is Daphne. I'm a student in Cologne studying journalism, and my question is for Christian? Yeah, sorry. So I saw that you have been working in Germany, Russia, and Ecuador, is that right? In journalism as well. On your expertise of Reporters Without Borders and the press freedom, did you note what are the differences that you noticed working in these three different countries regarding press freedom?
I mean, you mean historically? What have been the differences? I mean, the challenges are very different. I would say, and Russia has been always a country which, in the time when I worked in Russia as a journalism trainer, actually, it was in the high time of Putin, when Putin was still more or less young, and at that time, I would say, this was a very ambiguous environment for journalism. On the one hand, journalists being human beings, being Russian citizens, experiencing a stronger safety in their own private life because with this higher income and so on and so forth, and some growing threats which I would say Russian journalistic community and even foreigners maybe underestimated or misunderstood at that time, because Putin, he still had a very nice discourse talking about democracy. So in the time when I lived in Russia, I would say that was for journalism a very different time compared to today. And in Ecuador, the time when I worked in Ecuador, I worked there as a journalist. Yeah, I mean, it's totally different compared to Russia, which is a tiny country where the question of safety of journalists is a very different. And currently, actually, the question of safety of journalists is really dramatically changing in Ecuador, because actually the narcos, they are taking over some regions in Ecuador power and threatening journalists. And the time when I lived in Ecuador, there have been few killings of journalists, and this is currently actually life threats exist, and even killings exist, and this is actually dramatically.
Thank you.
There was another person. Please don't be shy.
Hello, I'm Ali Eren Renklius, freelancer, and I also wanted to ask you a question on the role of the EU, because the EU right now also sanctions journalists. In Germany we have the case of Hüseyin Doğru, and the point is he is accused of being somehow in a network for Russian propaganda. But the problem, without saying is this true or not, this is not the aim of my question, is there was no court process, there was no democratically legitimated process, and the EU-Commission just sanctioned this man and his whole family, and he is a journalist. And yeah, how are you perceiving this certain situation? Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, thanks for the question. It's a tricky case, I have to say. I mean, from a Reporters Without Borders perspective, the case of Hüseyin Doğru, what we see is actually, without judging the case as such, we see it very critically that sanctions can be used against journalists and human beings, private sanctions. Sometimes there could be legitimate reasons for sanctions, but this, yes. But as such, the whole procedure, very often we don't perceive as very transparent. I would say so, the criteria, the attribution, things, and this maybe just as a small comment on this, and we have questions as well.
Please, come on over.
Hi, my name is Sagar, and I'm a founder of a provenance tech company called Deutsche. I wanted to ask, taking into account that AI today is now both an opportunity and a risk, I'm noticing that the publicly funded media or news organization versus the private news organization, the gap, how do you feel about the gap that is between them, the economic viability, the resources that they have to do good reporting? Is it widening right now, or because when I look at the Reuters or the top media companies, they have all the technology, all the resources to produce the content, to embed all the provenance in there. But when I look at the publicly funded news organizations, they barely have enough to do the real reporting, let alone to use the technology as the second layer to make sure that the content is produced in the right way. So how do you feel about this gap, which seems to be widening, but I would like your views on how do you see this?
I think that's a question for you, Jessica.
And just to be curious, what country are you referring to specifically, or is this something that you've been observing?
Just the global thing, also in Europe, but also in India as well. I'm originally from India, but I live in the Netherlands. So both ways I've seen same patterns.
Yes, because I guess public service media can be different in many different countries, and I think recently they've been under financial pressure and budget cuts, and therefore that also, affects their ability to invest in tools, and also they've seen, cuts in staff. So I think that's a real pressure within public broadcasters, but I wouldn't dismiss that that's not a pressure within other media outlets too, depending on their size. I think, obviously bigger commercial publishers in the West may have more resources and solid business models. The Financial Times and the likes have AI licensing deals. They have kind of more solid grounding. But we see many other public interest media that are also very short on funds, and there's a resourcing gap there too. But there are other ways, in terms of integrating AI that can be done at low costs. And I was talking earlier about, shared services and ways to bring media together to actually reduce costs together and collaborate. And I think that's one of the promising models for the future, is that there will be more opportunities, and I think it's probably necessary for media to come together and ensure that they can make the most of these opportunities without bearing all of the costs themselves.
Please.
I find that interesting, or rather your question interesting, because I would have thought, and that might be a German perspective, but I would have thought that public service media are in quite a comfortable situation to look at what's happening with AI and to think about how to use it and when to use it and when not to use it, when a lot of other media houses are under much more economic pressure and feel that this is now the chance to be much more efficient and save money by producing or using AI to produce content quickly, maybe with fewer staff. So what I have been seeing is really more that the public service media are more cautious and careful and, looking at maybe also deliberately not using AI for certain things, while others cannot really afford that.
It's also the risk part of things, right? But because they are also on the equal terms of they have to do the fact checking, they are bombarded with the AI generated content and at the same level. So the level of tool and the investment that is needed to tackle those problems seems to be very different. So there's one thing to use AI in your workflows and stuff, but then it's another thing to kind of like fight with AI, where to fight fake news or misinformation and disinformation campaigns where it's like an arms race, right, with the detectives, like the amount of resources needed to detect AI content versus the amount of resources needed to generate AI generated content. But yeah, thank you for the perspective. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. We have time for one last question. Otherwise, I would thank you all for participating. Today's discussion has made one thing clear. Journalism is facing pressure, but we've also heard a lot about solutions, cross-border collaborations, making media sustainability better, working responsibly with AI. Those are all part of the answers. And in the end, a peaceful society also depends on people's ability to take part in the public discourse and to have access to reliable information, right? So, you've been a wonderful audience, you've been a wonderful panel. Thank you thank you to UNESCO, thank you to the German Commission for UNESCO and DW for making this possible. Enjoy the rest of the GMF.